obviously the spiritual life is mainly, you and God and prayer, but it's also the group, the community. If you're exempting yourself from the community, not only do you exempt yourself from the wisdom, like all those books you're talking about, they came from people who were in the community, in the Christian community, right? You're exempting yourself from the wisdom, the tradition, the liturgies, but also you're sort of impoverishing the community. You're not participating in the community yourself. You're not, and which I think is a loss for the community. I found this quote. I'm going to read you this quote from this. It's a gay couple. I just think this is brilliant. So it's at the end of this article about LGBTQ friendly churches and saying how difficult it is. Carlos Rosada and Luis Suarez, a married couple from Queens, said this was the distinction they appreciated. They're talking about the kind of arguments in the church.
Sure.
They came to St. Paul's because they wanted their son, okay, this is married, gay couple with a son, to see that his family had a place in the church his fathers had grown up in. Mr. Rosada said, look at this, quote, "We are here. We are not going anywhere. I am Catholic. This is where I belong."
Hello, Damn Givers. Welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast. I'm your host, Nick Lapara, and on this show, I talk with people living meaningful lives, people who give a damn. Friends, this is the first intro and outro being recorded from my new office in New York City, in Manhattan. More on why we moved here and all of that very, very soon. But thank you for showing up today. I'm so glad you're here listening in. And if you love this show, if you love Let's Give a Damn and what we're trying to do and build, please consider subscribing to the show on your favorite podcast app and maybe share this episode with a friend or two or 10. It would mean the world to me. I'm beyond thrilled to introduce you all to my friend and guest today, Father James Martin. Father Jim is a Jesuit priest, editor-at-large of the Jesuit magazine America, and he is the author of Building a Bridge, Learning to Pray, and several other incredible books. I have long admired Father Jim for so many reasons, and I'm glad it worked out for us to chat during Pride Month because he has been an incredibly vocal supporter of and advocate for LGBTQ people inside and outside of the Catholic Church for years. In fact, he was granted a 30-minute audience with Pope Francis, arguably the most famous religious leader in the world, a couple of years ago, and he spent much of that time talking to Pope Francis about the inclusion of and support for LGBTQ people in the Catholic Church. Another reason I wanted to have him on the podcast was to discuss his new book about prayer. Well, why prayer? Well, I've been on a roller coaster of a faith journey over the past few years. Many of you know that. I've shared many things about that on the podcast. But one of the very reasons why I don't think I can ever leave the faith is because of prayer. I love it. I need it. I partake in it. And I still have so much to learn regarding prayer, but prayer has helped me so much in so many ways. And specifically tied to this podcast, prayer has helped me become a much better damn giver. I'm sure many of you already pray, but we can always learn more about prayer and how to do it better. And for the rest of you, I'd love to try to convince you to learn how to pray today alongside Father Jim Martin. I think prayer will help you. I really do. A fair warning that this episode obviously has religious and specifically Protestant and Catholic overtones. I think that's obvious at this point. I hope that doesn't scare you away. I think this conversation is for everyone, and I hope you'll stick around. Before we jump into this conversation, a quick reminder that you can anytime and for any reason email me at hello@letsgiveadamn.com. I love hearing from you. I mean it. That's not just something I say. Please connect with me. I love hearing from each and every one of you. And now, let's get right into my conversation with the wonderful Father James Martin. Let's go. Father Jim Martin, thank you so much for joining me on the Let's Give a Damn podcast today.
My pleasure.
We've already had a couple minutes of back and forth. Maybe some of that we'll include in the show. But I have been a massive, I don't know if fan is the right word for a Catholic priest, but I've been a massive beneficiary of your work over the years. And you've always been on the list for me to chat with on the show for very obvious reasons, I think. So I'm just so grateful that we have an hour today
Thanks.
to talk together.
My pleasure. You can say fan. That doesn't bother me. It's nice.
There you go.
It's
I am
better
a
than
fan.
it's better than the opposite, you know?
Very true. Very true. I always like to begin before we get into the meat of your life and work. I always love to begin with, how did you get here? Who are the people, places, and things that formed you and shaped you? Because there's always clues along the way, in my opinion, as to how we are shaped and formed and kind of the stuff we're doing, even if it's not like directly tied. So could you give us just a couple minutes on the who, what, when, where, and why of the beginning of Jim Martin's life?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. I grew up in Philadelphia in a fairly Catholic family, but not super religious. I didn't go to Catholic schools, elementary schools, high schools, colleges. Went to the University of Pennsylvania, certainly not a Catholic school, to the Wharton School of Business. And, basically because I thought, hey, you got to make a living, right? And Wharton was, has the reputation of the best undergraduate business school. I studied finance. We always say not finance. Finance sounds a lot more classy. And the joke was you'd get $10,000 more as a starting salary if you majored in finance instead of finance.
I think you're right. It does sound very classy.
It does. Worked for General Electric in New York City. Took a job there in 1982. This is at the height of, to kind of contextualize, at the height of like the yuppies. And that was me. And I had a great time, making a lot of money and, going clubbing and, fill in the blanks, all the stuff one would do in one's 20s in New York. And then took a job at GE Capital. I won't tell you my whole life story. And was I kind of got dissatisfied with what I was doing. Sort of felt like a square peg in a round hole. And then stumbled on the writings of Thomas Merton, who I'm sure you know. And that really just got me thinking about doing something else, although I didn't really know what that would be. And I met the Jesuits, a Catholic religious order, and they just seemed to fit. And I entered in 1988, and then my Jesuit, you talked about what forms you, my Jesuit formation, that's what we actually call it, took me from the novitiate in Jamaica Plain, Boston, to philosophy studies at Loyola Chicago, to 2 years of working in East Africa with refugees. Wow. I was ordained, I studied theology, and then I was ordained in 1999. And around that same time, I was assigned to America Media, then America Magazine. And I started writing, and that's basically what I do now. I mean, I'm a Jesuit priest, of course. I do all the things that priests do, and I write too. So it was kind of a circuitous path. I think that the person who sort of was most responsible for that, other than Jesus, of course, was Thomas Merton. Was the writings of Thomas Merton that really shook me out of my sort of slumber. It's a quote, I think it's Kant that talks about his dogmatic slumber. This shook me out of my secular slumber and just made me think, there might be another way of living life. Nothing wrong with the business world. I still, as you know, it's a real vocation for people. And in fact, I just had a reunion with some of my GE friends, and, a lot of them, they, up until recently, they're old enough now to be able to retire. They retire young, like 55. They're still in business and it's a vocation for them, but it just wasn't for me. And I think that I found what is for me.
So pre-1988, had you thought at all about becoming a priest or dedicating your life to this? No. Or was it like at any point in your life? So no. Up until that point, you were focused on, and it seems like that from your schooling and all that business, build a career out of this.
Yeah.
So what was there like and you just talked about that moment and that kind of shifted everything, but was there an exact moment? Was there a thing that happened, a situation that really, because that's a big shift after you've started your career. I mean, you're one of a handful of people that I could even go and find where that's happened. People change vocations, but that's a stark change. So was there something big that was happening that shifted
I would say
everything?
That's a great question. I would say it was a bit of a pull and a push. The push was out of GE, and I had some really unpleasant experiences that happened. Look, GE in the 1980s, like, a lot of corporations, was very hard driving, and, it was the era of Jack Welch. I'm talking to someone who was in, business for a while. Very hard driving, and there were some really unpleasant experiences that happened that I found just shocking. I mean, that people mistreating me, people mistreating others. I mean, I don't want to go into all the details, but, really kind of callous behavior that really shocked me. And at the same time, I thought, what am I doing here? I think one of the questions that no one ever asked me, which I think all young people should be asked, is what would you do if you could do anything you wanted to do? And when I was at Wharton, which was an excellent education, and I really enjoyed my time at Penn, the focus was on getting the best job you can and making as much money as you can. And then when I got to GE, the focus is on, as you know, as it should be, the bottom line. And I just thought, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem to be for me. And around that time came The Pull, which was the Thomas Merton book that said, hey, there's another way of living. Now, but to your point, I never thought about being a priest, and I didn't know what a Jesuit was. I barely knew what a monk was. And yet there was something in there. Look, I think the way that God works is through our desires. God was kind of calling me through my desire.
That's really beautiful, and I completely understand that. I have been a pastor in the past. I'm still ordained. I've been ordained in a variety of Protestant denominations. Even though the way I describe it is, so we're Anglo-Catholic right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're part of an Anglican, but very Catholic-leaning tradition. But I've been. And maybe someday you can convince me to go the rest of the way. For years and years, I've been very attracted to the Catholic faith for a lot of reasons. One of them was, so a few years ago, I was leaving the nonprofit world, and during my time in the nonprofit world, I had worked for some of the biggest Protestant leaders, like John Piper and a bunch of other people like that. These are people that I worked very closely with for a decade. All over the U.S., traveled all over the world doing this work. And when we were leaving Tacoma, Washington, which was our home before our 4 years in Nashville, we were downsizing to literally we only took what we could fit in the back of our Honda Odyssey minivan. So we were getting rid of thousands of books and so many things. My wife and I, all of us love books. And so we're clearing off these bookshelves, and we had said to each other, we've got one bin apiece. One bin could fit around 90 to 100 books. Those are the books that we're taking. And so as I was sorting through the books, which ones I'm going to take, I realized that I was leaving all of these Protestant and mostly still alive authors on the shelf. And I was taking mostly, it was all Catholic writers and Anglican writers and Episcopalian writers. That was it. Those were the ones that I was attracted to. And that began our journey away from kind of traditional non-denominational Protestantism. And again, we're still on a journey, but it's been a weird journey from.
That's
where
a great story. It's it's like a parable.
Agreed.
And then the man looked at the books and said, what are the ones that I seem to really be attracted to? That's great.
Yeah,
and by the way, we'd be happy to have you in the Catholic Church.
I appreciate it.
Welcome.
I appreciate it, and that's actually part of this conversation today is going to be me asking you in a broader faith way. I don't want to get to it yet. I want to talk about pride actually here as we begin our conversation. And I want to end talking about your new book on prayer, which is fantastic. But somewhere in the conversation, I do want to address, there's a lot of people listening. There are people listening that I think are interested in faith. There are also a lot of people that are still struggling, but still in. And there are a lot of people, frankly, that over the last 4 years, things they've seen that happen among Christians and people that say they follow Jesus. There's a lot of people I know that are listening because a lot of them are my friends that have essentially said, fuck it to the faith and said, if that's what it looks like, I'm out, right? And so there's a lot of people listening, and I want you, in a few minutes to convince those people or at least give your hey, don't leave. There's something more, there's something better there. Cause that's how I feel. I've tried to leave, Father Jim. I have tried to leave the faith because I've looked at what's happening and I don't want any part in it. And I literally can't leave. I can't leave. And one of the reasons is because of prayer. And we'll get to that here in a minute. So just to prep you for in a couple minutes, I want you to give your case. But let's talk about, this is one of the reasons I'm glad we got to talk this month is because it is Pride Month, and you have been, and your faith tradition has not been historically welcoming to LGBTQ plus people, but you stand out as one of these leaders that has for years now spoken out in support of our LGBTQ friends, our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, and non-binary friends. So a couple years ago, you got a rare 30-minute audience with Pope Francis, who I admire a ton, and I know you do as well. I know you can't talk about a lot of the things that happened in that conversation, but you did advocate for our LGBTQ, friends. Then a couple months ago, he came out with this statement saying we cannot and do not bless same-sex unions. So I know you talked very positively about that conversation for a couple of years, and I'm not even sure you would withdraw that positivity, but he did say this, right, about these same-sex unions. And so what has been your journey? I know a lot of it started with the Pulse shooting in 2016. That's when something was kind of awakened in you. Talk through your journey of getting from there, and maybe it started before, but that's when you started speaking up about it. What has that journey been like in a tradition that is not welcoming typically to LGBTQ people, to stand up for them?
Oh, that's a great question and a big question. So I had been, like everybody, I mean, I think most people, I know LGBTQ people as friends. And after I was, through my Jesuit training and after I was ordained, I knew them as friends, but also as parishioners and people that would come to me for spiritual direction and counseling. They were, and also I live in New York, so they were a part of my world. But it wasn't until, as you say, the Pulse nightclub massacre in 2016 that I really felt called to step out a little bit and advocate for them more publicly, because I felt that, the response to the shooting was really mostly silence from the bishops. And then that led to a talk, which led to this book called Building a Bridge, which led to this ministry, which I do with many, many other people. And by the way, there's a documentary coming out I don't know when this is going to air, but soon, I'll say.
Amazing.
Pardon me?
I said amazing. Can't wait to watch it.
Yeah. And anyway, and that led to that wonderful meeting with the Pope, and also tons of pushback, which I still get daily. Yeah, it's been, I have to speak about this in spiritual terms. It's been a real call from the Holy Spirit. And what does that mean? That doesn't mean the Holy Spirit came down a little bird and told me, I want you to advocate for LGBTQ people. But I felt this desire to really be more public. And all along the way, different things have happened that have kind of invited me into spaces to talk about this. And so I do a lot of, for example, lectures and Zoom calls with schools, and it just keeps, building. And, as I said, there's been a lot of pushback. There's been a lot of, I'm called heretic and apostate and false priest, and on every social media platform you can imagine, and in person. And I'm sure at this documentary, there'll be protesters. But who cares? If they have legitimate critiques, I'm obviously open to listening to them, but a lot of it's just homophobia and hatred. So it's been a beautiful journey. And it's been a journey also of kind of being educated, because I don't, I'm only one voice. I can't pretend to speak for the LGBTQ community. This is what they should do, or this is what the church should do. And so I need to be open to being challenged. And I am often by LGBTQ Catholics. But for the most part, I'm just happy to be an advocate and happy to be ministering with them and among them. And the meeting with the Pope was really one of the high points of my life, frankly.
Sure.
And I should say, this is going to sound very Jesuitical, but hey, I'm a Jesuit. So the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith put that document out, and Pope Francis basically approved it. And I think, this is going to sound Jesuitical. We have to take seriously these reports from the Vatican that said that he was not happy with it and was distancing himself from it in later statements. We really have to take those seriously. So look, it's a big church, and and along with that big church goes decisions that a lot of people aren't happy with. But I always compare it to the United States. Look, a lot of people have difficulties with, say, President Trump. A lot of people have difficulties with President Biden, and that doesn't mean you leave. And same with your family. So but why would you stay? I'm going to anticipate your question. You stay in the church not because of the institution, but because it is an encounter with Christ, with the living Christ. And so our faith is about a relationship with a person. It's not about a book or a set of rules. As important as organized religion is, it's about a person. And we encounter that person in community, right? So it's not just you and God or you and Jesus. But that's the thing. It's an encounter with a mystery, which I think still eludes a lot of, otherwise devout people, because for a lot of people, it's all about rules and regulations. And then for other people, it's just about the organization. Like, well, I don't want to stay because I don't agree with it. Well, hey, there are a lot of things over the last 4 years I didn't agree with, but I don't leave the country and I don't renounce my citizenship. You try to make it better, and you try to help. Same with the family. And people always say to me, well, how can LGBTQ Catholics stay in the church? Well, guess what? They're Catholic, right? They're baptized. They're Catholic. They're as Catholic as the Pope or me.
Yep.
And there's a great article the other day in the New York Times about LGBTQ friendly parishes. And the outro, as they say in journalism, the last line was stunning. It was this LGBTQ couple who said, "We're Catholic. We're not going anywhere. Why would we leave?"
I love it.
It was really powerful and surprising, because I think a lot of people think, "Oh, well, why would you stay at all?" But again, I ask that question to people who have trouble with parts of the government. You're going to leave? You want to renounce your citizenship? No, I would never do that. I'm an American. It's the same thing, and even deeper, because it's your baptism.
Yeah, I mean, I love. We could talk for 4 hours just.
Yeah,
on the
we
last
could. I'd be happy to.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to do a part 2 at some point.
Director's cut.
What I love about what you just said is, I was just listening to this podcast. By the way, I need to get that article, or I'll just look it up. But I need to get that article from you because I really, really want to read that. But I was listening to this On Being with Krista Tippett.
Oh yeah, she's great.
She's amazing, and she was interviewing Daniel. I think you pronounce it Kahneman, and he's this older gentleman. Really great podcast. But the name of the interview and the content of the interview could be summed up with the title: "Why We Contradict Ourselves and Confound Each Other." I am a, for lack of a better term, because I don't like the term, but for lack of a better term, I'm a liberal. Like, I'm progressive in most, if not all, of my beliefs. But the problem I have with my side, if I'm going to, in air quotes, say my side, is that we act like, for one, only the conservatives are contradicting themselves all the time and are full of, and that's a normal thing to do, especially when you try to play teams.
Sure.
But when you realize, we have to deeply and profoundly realize that we ourselves are contradicting ourselves each and every day. And there's not one group, institution, organization, nothing that we do in life or are part of where there aren't contradictions happening and where we're not constantly confounding each other. And so while I've had moments where I did want to leave the faith, and not really the faith, but leave the institutionalized church altogether, I kept coming back to, I'm never going to get away from contradictions. I'm never going to get away from people failing me,
or sin
and people doing wrong, right? Like leaders doing wrong.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends right now, in the Southern Baptist Convention, it is a shit show right now because all these higher up leaders, who supported Trump for 4 years and who did all these things, are ignoring all of these sex abuse cases. There are pastors still preaching every single Sunday that have raped and sexually abused women, and the cases are out there and they're happening. They still get to get up and preach every Sunday. And I have really good friends that are still part of the SBC, and I don't question that because I know what's happening there. I know they have integrity. I know they're good people, and I know they want the best for the people that they have under their care. Why don't they leave? Because wherever they go, whichever institution they choose next, there's going to be contradiction.
No, of course. And the search for a religious organization without sin is a search without end. I mean, no matter where you go, and that doesn't excuse things. I mean, I can tell you even more about the Catholic Church's sins and sex abuse and on and on and on and on and on from the inside, right? And but I think again, the problem is that people tend to say, well, if this is sinful, I need to leave, rather than understanding that sin has been part of the church. I mean, look, St. Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times.
Yeah.
Right. And Jesus, after the resurrection, forgives him. I mean, that's a pretty big sin. You have conflict between Peter and Paul. I mean, there's a letter from Paul that says, which I love, I argued in Peter's face. I challenged him to his face. He's very proud about that, as you know. And so, disputes, arguments, division, sin, human frailty, vanity, pride. It's going to be there. And I think the problem is if you exempt yourself from that, as the disciples said to Jesus, "Where shall we go, Lord?" I mean, is it just gonna be you and God? Is that really what God wants in terms of just you and God? I often, obviously the spiritual life is mainly, you and God and prayer, but it's also the group, the community. If you're exempting yourself from the community, not only do you exempt yourself from the wisdom, like all those books you're talking about, they came from people who were in the community, in the Christian community, right? You're exempting yourself from the wisdom, the tradition, the liturgies, but also you're sort of impoverishing the community. You're not participating in the community yourself. You're not, and which I think is a loss for the community. I found this quote. I'm going to read you this quote from this. It's a gay couple. I just think this is brilliant. So it's at the end of this article about LGBTQ friendly churches and saying how difficult it is. Carlos Rosada and Luis Suarez, a married couple from Queens, said this was the distinction they appreciated. They're talking about the kind of arguments in the church.
Sure.
They came to St. Paul's because they wanted their son, okay, this is married, gay couple with a son, to see that his family had a place in the church his fathers had grown up in. Mr. Rosada said, look at this, quote, "We are here. We are not going anywhere. I am Catholic. This is where I belong," end quote.
Goodness gracious.
To me, that's just so much.
Yeah.
I just think there's so much integrity with that. I do not blame people who leave. I certainly do not. And I understand them, especially when I hear, obviously, stories about abuse and people feeling harassed and, rejected, of course. By the same token, I also look to those people who say, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to try to change things. One of my great heroes is John Lewis. And, I mean, theoretically, John Lewis could have just flown to Europe, right? After being beaten, and I'm going to a place where I can feel welcome, as a black man. He did not. And I admire people like that. So I look to people like that, and, look at Jesus. Jesus could have just stayed in Nazareth, said, well, I'm not going to deal with all this stuff. Yeah. So anyway, it's about membership, but it's deeper in the church. It's about your identity.
You said you alluded a few minutes ago to the kind of mystery, and you've used the word liturgy several times. And for people that don't know, liturgy is the work of the people, right? And in a Catholic or Anglican Episcopalian setting, it's a lot of praying things at the same time, speaking things over to each other at the same time, following a process, a journey, for an hour at Mass or whatever. That's one of the reasons because I grew up in a independent, fundamentalist Baptist tradition. So many rules, so many regulations. Can't wear name brand clothing, no Christmas trees, no drinking, no smoking. Can't watch these movies, can't go here, so many rules. Women wear dresses. Everybody has 47 children, King James only Bible. There were 1,000 rules to follow. That is the opposite of life-giving. It's life squelching when your the entirety of your life is trying to follow rules and not break them. Versus, yes, there are obviously these commands from Jesus, right? And we've got a Bible that we try to follow. I am horrible at it, but we've got these guidelines and these things to follow. But there's the reason I'm drawn toward Catholicism, and the reason that we're part of an Anglo-Catholic parish now, is the mystery. I have found so much more room here, right? I've found so much more room to wonder, to ask questions, and to not know what the hell's going on most of the time. That is so freeing. That I can stay in. That I can see myself being a part of long term, because it's not exhausting. I actually feel peace and rest versus this constant need to like, am I ticking all the boxes? Am I following all the rules? In addition to that, what this gay couple you just quoted, one of the main reasons we moved from non-denominational Protestantism and we're on this journey now is, along with the books, right? I talked about the books on the shelf. It was also looking at my 3 kids and saying, my wife and I had real conversations 6 years ago about this. We have hopped from organization to denomination all of our lives, never settling, never feeling at home. And again, always like leaving in a discontented way because there were so many rules to follow and we just always felt inferior and less than. Do we want to pass that on to our kids? Or do we want to be part of something that our kids can we can pass the torch from us to them as they grow up and as they make decisions themselves? Do we want to be part of this thing? At least we have something big, mysterious, and it's been around for a long time, right? So it's tried and true. Mistakes and all, warts and all, scars and all, this thing's been around for a long time. That feels worthy of passing along to the kids versus, the latest fad denomination that Protestants will come up with, right? So anyway, that's kind of, I love how you framed that, because that's how we feel as well about this faith journey we've been on.
Well, it's life-giving, and it's not to say that the Catholic Church doesn't have rules for, as you know,
100%.
But it is, it is primarily an encounter with mystery. And I always love to quote, I think it's either Augustine or Aquinas that said that if you can define it, it is not God. Right. So God is, as they say, always greater than. And even the most rigid conservative Catholic, rule-based would admit that God is more than we can understand. Jesus Christ is more than we can understand. And I came across a phrase, I guess, where was it? It was a scripture scholar who said that Christ is inexhaustible, which I love. And so you can never say that if you follow these set of rules, you are following Jesus, because it's always much more than that. And Jesus talks about that in terms of the controversy stories with religious leaders of his time, which we can't paint as all bad. They were trying to be devout in their own way, but for some of them, it was a real rule-based religion, at the time. And he upends all of that. He breaks a lot of the, the purity codes, and he eats with tax collectors and sinners, and they don't like him for it. And they, he does all sorts of things that annoy people because it is against these rules. And yet here we are in a church, in the Catholic Church, for example, that has, we just issued a new code of canon law. So it's a human and it's a divine institution. We have to remember that.
Yeah.
And again, it's like the United States. This great ideal. I am proud to be an American, and I think it's a beautiful country, but it is deeply flawed. That doesn't mean I hate it or I want to leave. It means I want to make it better.
That's really beautiful.
It's like the church. And the other thing is, look, for me, I always tell people this, look, so I'm baptized, that should be good enough. I've made a lot of promises in my life to God. As a young Jesuit, I made a vow to live in the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, for the rest of my life. And at my ordination as a priest, I made promises, and that's it. So people say, why don't you leave? Because first of all, I'm a Catholic. Second of all, I made a promise to God. And so, we can't pick that, with that line from Lord of the Rings that I love, you can't pick what time you live in. You can only pick your response to that time, which is quite beautiful. I think Lord of the Rings has a lot of great lessons. And of course, Tolkien was a pretty religious guy. Yes. So this is the time we're living in. And for the LGBTQ person, I think what's interesting, and one of the things I think is a burden, and I use John Lewis a lot. So John Lewis was not only persecuted and beaten, right, but he also had to be a leader.
Yep.
Right. So it's this, it's hard enough to be a leader, and it's hard enough to be persecuted and beaten, but to do both of those things. And I think LGBTQ Catholics are in that situation now. And I often tell them that, which is a very strange thing to say to somebody, like, well, Father, you're asking us to be like leaders and leaven in the community, to use Jesus's image of the yeast and the bread, at the same time that we feel rejected. And it's like, yeah, that's right. Look at John Lewis. Look at Rosa Parks. Look at all these people. I look back to the civil rights era as a great, so many great images.
No, that's really great, because yes, it's completely understandable when someone is a victim of, hatred, homophobia, bigotry, whatever, for them to take care of themselves and to not lead, right? I understand that. There's fear, there's self-preservation, and
Sure.
but you're so right. And that's what Let's Give a Damn is all about, is I'm trying to put together this global family of people that at some point in their lives, we can't always do it. There are seasons for retreat and self-care, but it is the people. I'm looking for the people. And I'm glad we're tying that to the faith context right now as well. I'm looking for the people that will say, even though I am the victim here, right? I am the victim of, again, whatever it is, hatred, racism, xenophobia, whatever. I am going to stand up and in the face of those evil things, and I'm going to say no. And I'm going to push back, because going back to that Tolkien quote, like, we don't get to choose, but we're here. We're here now. You and I get to live in this amazing time in life where technology is moving at such an incredible pace. And, I have 1,000,001, that's too many. I have 101 things I could say about Jeff Bezos, and they're not positive, but we're in the time where Jeff Bezos just announced that he's going to space in July with his brother, like mind-blowing stuff.
Really?
Like, he's going to be on the first journey into space. Like, this is the best time ever to give a damn, is what I always tell people, because we have more resources and support at our disposal than anybody at any time in history. So and put that in the faith context for, again, taking into account this month with our during Pride with our LGBTQ family and friends. I understand if you just want to retreat and kind of, let things progress as they progress, and you keep it quiet. Like, I totally understand that, but it is going to take people standing up that are experiencing that hatred and that are experiencing that persecution to say, no more. It's time for this to be over. And the way that I think that we do that is, drawing from another amazing leader, Dr. King, when he talks about this, the moral, the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends toward justice, right? This idea that we could work hard all our lives, like John Lewis did. John Lewis is a great example, and so is Dr. King. Worked so hard, tirelessly, years, decades. They were beaten, they were arrested. And, in Dr. King's case, he was ultimately murdered for what he was doing. They didn't get to see the fruit of their labor entirely. In small parts, really, especially Dr. King, because John Lewis outlived him by decades. And that's okay. Like, becoming okay with that we're going to work hard and we're going to do what we know we're called to do, and we might not get to see the fruits of our labor. That's an important part of giving a damn.
Well, and that's really where the faith perspective comes in, because you hand over these things to God, and you say that I'm going to do this, and I'm going to trust that this is planting a seed. I mean, Jesus, the image in the gospel is the leaven, a little bit of yeast that expands the bread, or the mustard seed, the little seed that grows into a big bush. And so I think one of the benefits of a faith perspective, and this is not why you have a faith perspective, faith perspective because you believe in God, but one of the benefits is that when you are engaged in kind of social justice stuff and you don't seem to see results, you don't get discouraged. You don't get despairing. There's that great, the Romero Prayer? Have you ever seen the Romero Prayer?
I don't know.
I'll call it right up. It's
Please.
It's from Oscar. It's attributed to Oscar Romero, the great Archbishop of San Salvador, who was martyred. And funny enough, the prayer itself, which makes me laugh, I just think this is really charming, was not even written by him. It was written
interesting.
Was written by a guy named Bishop Ken Untner. So there's something beautiful about even the prayer that he wrote wasn't written by him. So basically it's I'm not going to read the whole thing. He said, it helps now and then to step back and take the long view. The kingdom of God is not only beyond our efforts, it is beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. No statement says all that could be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings wholeness. So at the end, he says, which is beautiful. I just love this. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. This is the most beautiful. We are prophets of a future, not our own. And so it's just, we plant the seeds that will one day grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces far beyond our capabilities. This enables us to do something and to do it well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning. I mean, that's stunning to me. And I think that, I once asked, do you know Sister Helen Prejean, author of Dead Man Walking?
Love her.
I love her, and she's very funny. She once said to me, a lot of these people that work in social justice are just so angry. And I saw that as a door opening. And I was like, I've always wanted to ask someone this question. This is years ago. I said, why do you think that is? She says, because I don't see results, and they get angry, and they think it's all, it's all related. It's all their failure when they don't. Again, it's the Romero Prayer that you need to think about. It's you do what you can, and you trust that God will bring it to completion. In the story of the multiplication of the loaves and the fishes, there's a little boy in John's gospel that brings the 2 loaves and the 5 fish, or the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. I can never remember. And it's for a huge crowd, and he just gives it. It's a great image. He just gives these little things that he has, and Jesus, multiplies them in the miracle story. And that then in the same way, God can kind of magnify what we're doing, but we have to really trust that. And that's where I think people of faith really have a different perspective. So look, if I, whenever I die, hopefully not for a long time, and it seems like nothing has changed in the church with LGBTQ people, I'd be disappointed, of course, but I'm not going to be despairing, because I know that these are seeds that are planted. Like John Lewis, think of him getting beaten I don't know why I go back to him. I just found his story just so powerful.
I love it.
Think of him getting beaten at that bridge in Selma, right? And giving up. I mean, who could have blamed him?
Nobody would have blamed him.
No, at age like 27 or something, he did not. And it's like a seed. It's a seed. Look what grew up. I mean, his life and the inspiration and the just. So that's part of that's despairing never comes from God. Despair never comes from God.
John Lewis getting beaten at that bridge on that day, that would have been a footnote in a story, right? We would have read that story, and we would have known about him, but not the John Lewis that persevered for 50 more years after that, right? And that's the difference, I think, is that we can choose to back down when things get tough, and you're not, and I don't blame you. I want to make that clear for people that are hurt and that are downtrodden. But those that push past that, I think, are the ones that end up planting more seeds, right? Because again, he didn't get to see the fruits of his labor, but they get to plant more seeds than everybody else. You're planting seeds that I too hope that you see. For my sake and for my friends and family and for your sake, I hope that you see, more fruit from your labor while you're alive. But if you would have if you wouldn't have taken that stand in 2016 and maybe done, a talk here or there, but not taken the bold stand, writing the book, spending your 30 minutes in your lifetime talking to the Pope about this, right? Like, now this is a part of who you are, and the more seeds are being planted.
Thanks. Yeah. And I also feel, this is going to sound banal, but it's the right thing to do, and it's the Christian thing to do. And so the other thing is not caring about what a lot of crazy, homophobic people are saying online, and just really just saying, who cares? I mean, I literally wake up every day and there's stuff on my social media. You're a heretic. You're terrible. You're going to hell. You're a false priest. I can list all the insults and I don't really lose any sleep over them.
Yeah. I probably don't get as many as you do, but I get quite a bit for the work that I do, especially coming from where I did in like conservative Christianity. I have accounts that are set up strictly to troll me. Like it's all they screenshot posts of mine and they alter the stuff and talk about it and call me this and that. And a lot of my friends ask me, like, does that bother you? Like that would bother me so badly. And I'm like, I feel so bad for them. I feel so bad and sad that they're taking time out of their day to worry about what I'm doing instead of them trying to make a difference in their world, whatever that looks like, right?
Yeah, and they feel that they're prophets.
Yes.
They have to call out evil. I'll tell you, if you don't mind, one of the things that's really helped me was I had an experience in prayer where I was praying over the story of the rejection at Nazareth. Do you know that story?
Yes.
In Luke. So for those who don't know, Jesus gets up in the synagogue in Nazareth and he basically says he's the Messiah, and the townspeople, we sort of sugarcoat this, try to kill him, try to throw him off a cliff. And he leaves. And I was imagining myself in prayer, like sort of seeing this episode. And I said to Jesus in prayer, I'm not having a vision or hearing voices, just to be clear, how are you able to do that? Like, I couldn't imagine, this was years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. And the words I heard in prayer, which I believe came from Jesus, again, I didn't hear them actually orally, were the words that came to my mind were, must everyone like you? And I realized, the joke was, at that time, I really did want everyone to like me. And I realized, to be free of the need to be loved, liked, or approved of by everybody, Jesus, he didn't need people to approve of him. And so, you have people who are opposing you and calling you names and saying you're this or that, or you're a bad Christian. Probably get bad Christian. I get bad Catholic. Then, you really have to be free of that need of that sort of desire for approval that we all have. And once you're free of that, you can really embrace what's right. You don't treat these people poorly or you're not mean to them, but you also don't, there's not a hold. It doesn't enter you. You don't let it in. It doesn't make a claim on you. And so you can kind of look at the stuff and just delete it. I often compared with people who are experiencing this for the first time. I say, imagine if you're crossing the street in New York and someone yells out, "Hey, Nick, you're a murderer. You're a murderer. You should be in jail." Now you might turn and, because you hear your name, you might be a little like, "Oh my gosh, why would you say that about me?" But you're not going to go home and say, "Oh my gosh, am I a murderer? Did I murder
so
anybody?"
Good.
I really have to think about it. The next time you see that guy, you might turn and look. Eventually, you're going to pass that guy in the street every day. And there are a lot of people like this in New York. And you're going to hear him. You'll be nice to him, but it's not going to change you. It's not going to make a claim on you. Now, if someone comes up to you as a friend who is really sincere and says, "I have a little trouble with what you said on your podcast, and can you help me with this? I don't really understand." Then you answer and you go back and forth. But the other person, you can't let that in.
No, don't let that live rent free in your head, for sure.
No, exactly. Or at all.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's true. Even if you paid me rent, you're not in here.
Right. That's right. It's not worth it.
I do want to talk about your book because it's tied so very closely right before we get there. And I want to be aware of our time.
Sure.
I want to, because you mentioned a couple minutes ago, and this is an important part because I'm so bad at it. And I realize that, and people that follow me on social media can see this, and they know it's a struggle, and they know that I think most people can tell that I'm trying to work on it. Is this whole, you talked about Sister Helen Prejean talking about the kind of the angry activist, the angry social justice, I'm a recovering and sometimes relapsing. People that know me you can go back. I don't delete tweets, or I try not to anyway, because I want people to kind of see the journey. I got like 70,000 tweets out there from the last 10 years. And I have been known to, there's been multiple times, especially during these these police shootings and the police brutality, that I have said the words "fuck the police" multiple times on my social media. I mean it. That's how I feel. I think I long for a world where we don't need militarized police. But the thing that I keep coming back to, and the thing that the feedback they give back to me, my mentors and strangers alike, and I welcome it from strangers, especially when it's done in love, is, "Nick, if you just reeled that in," and I think part of it is wanting results now versus knowing that I won't see the results of some of this, right? I mean, look at the work that Sister Helen's doing, trying to abolish the death penalty and all this stuff. Like, she is watching people, be slaughtered by the state. On the death certificate, it says homicide. It says the state just killed this person, and she's seeing that happen over and over and over again. And I'm sure she has sad days and she feels distraught, but not letting that anger her. I've never seen a moment where she's just out there profanities and stuff.
No,
it's so reined in, and she's being way more. And people like that, I know, are being more effective in the short term because they're not lashing out. And so I'm trying to learn that, and I'm learning that from you as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's a great insight, because some of the emotions that we have against various injustices, everywhere, it does make us angry. And there's a kind of righteous anger, about certain things. Jesus gets angry, right? In the temple and many places. But I think you're right that you look at someone like Sister Helen, and she is able to, always just trust that what she's doing is part of the Christian call to discipleship, but also that does not mean you demonize the other person.
Yeah.
Right. Even from the cross, Jesus doesn't say F the Romans, right? He actually prays for them. He says, forgive them for they don't know what they do. So I think from a spiritual point of view, it's kind of understanding our common humanity. But also to your point, I really think that's a good point. From a practical point of view, I think it also attracts more people to you.
Yep.
Right? People want to be around someone who is at peace and calm and is not going to, sort of make them angry. So it's a balance. That doesn't mean that anger is sinful, because again, Jesus gets angry, and we should be angry at stuff that we see as injustice. But what do you do with the anger? Right? How do you channel it? And I think Helen's a great example of that. And people that I admire are really, they're charitable.
Yep.
Yeah. Right? I mean, like Pope Francis. Pope Francis has been demonized by everyone at this point. He is very calm about it, and he does not lash out. And I'm sure he's a man of kind of intense passions, and he listens. See, that's about encountering the other person too. He's always open to listening to the other person. And this is what Jesus asks us to do. Even the people in Jesus's time who were the great enemies, the Samaritans. I think we lose that, as you know. The Samaritans were just the worst people. And who does Jesus make as the hero of his greatest parable, or his most famous parable? The Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. So it's, again, I think part of it is it's not creating this us and them, as tempting as that is. There's an us, and we're pure, and we're on the right side, and we're all about social justice. And there's them, and they're awful, and they're hateful, and they're sinful, and for Jesus, there's no us and them. It's just us, and that's shocking to people. And it's hard too. It's a kind of asceticism.
Yeah.
So for example, in my line of work, as I said, I have people who just despise me. I mean, that's not an understatement. Despise me and wish that I were dead. And when are you going to be excommunicated? I just see that today. But I can't. I mean, I have feelings about that, but I can't really be attacking them. What good does that do? It does no good. But by the same token, I don't let them stop me.
Yeah, that's a good question to ask, right? That's the question I need to have tattooed on the back of my eyelids. It's like, what good is it going to do? That thing you want to tweet or say or share right now, what good? If it's going to do good, if this is the time for that angry table flipping moment, cool. If it's precise and there's a reason for it. But most of the time, I know that I would stop dead in my tracks if I asked the question, what good is it going to do?
Well, that's right. What practical good will it do? The three, I think this is Rumi, the three gates that something has to pass through before you say it. Something like, is it good? Is it true? And is it kind? Something like that. And I think, Nick, I think that there are ways of doing that. There are ways of drawing attention to something that aren't F this, F that, like asking questions or just retweeting a story. That enables people to, in a sense, come to their own decisions. Jesus teaches in parables. Jesus tells a story. Oftentimes when people say to me, I think, LGBT people are disgusting, or they shouldn't receive communion, or how can you work with those people? I'll usually tell a story. I'll say, hey, let me tell you about this gay couple I know. One of whom, suffered from cancer, and the other of whom nursed him, until he died. And I'll say, what do you think about that? Because Jesus teaches in parables. He doesn't say he doesn't say, here's a PowerPoint presentation of the 10 things you have to do to be a good neighbor. He tells a story. And I think stories convert us. So I guess what I'm saying is sometimes kind of, teaching the way Jesus does in an oblique way, which seems a little less forceful, can open people up more.
Really beautiful. So let's begin to wrap up this conversation by kind of pinnacling this conversation around your latest book, Learning to Pray. Here's why I think prayer is so important, and why your book is so important. So again, I have, at certain points in my journey over the last 6 years, I have wanted to leave all of it all together. And the two things that keep me here, are Jesus. And obviously we could talk all day long about God and Jesus and how they're one and the same, but they have these like different, right? So I can't even say personally, I can't even say God kept me here, even though I believe that's true. Jesus specifically kept me here, and prayer. Because I believe that I am a better activist, a better leader, a better husband, father, neighbor, social justice, whatever you want to call it, and kind of driving this movement, whatever size movement it is, this let's give a damn thing that we're doing, because of prayer. Because prayer is maybe the most. I failed a lot of things in my faith, but prayer is something that I get right, and by that I mean I just do it often. I'm sure I'm a terrible prayer, but I just do it often. And so, talk to me about this book, the importance of prayer. Let's get into it for a few minutes, because I think, and I ultimately want to get to, and I'll let you talk here in a second. I also want to get to, okay, there's believers and non-believers listening today. And even amongst the believers, I know that there are Muslims that listen to this podcast, Baha'i, Christian, Catholic, everybody, right? So I'm wrapping all those in believer as well. Like the role of prayer, is it for everybody? And what can it look like for all these people? So yeah, just talk about that book.
Sure. Yeah. So the book is Learning to Pray, and the subtitle says it all, a guide for everyone. And it is for everyone, because God desires a relationship with everyone. And how do we know that? Well, anyone who's felt that desire for prayer, for more intimacy with God, for a longing to know kind of what does it all mean, right? St. Augustine, I think one of the greatest quotes ever, our hearts are restless until they rest in you.
Yep.
I mean, and that's true. And so we all have that feeling. And so prayer is about encountering God in that space. Now, it sounds very vague, and so I talk about ways of praying. And I think the most important part of the book is what happens when you pray. Emotions, insights, memories, desires, feelings, what things come up, words, phrases, the kind of thing I just talked about, in that experience with, must everyone like you, and discerning, how do we know this comes from God? And so it's an invitation for people who are curious about prayer, because everyone thinks like you. Look, I hate to use you as an example. Everyone thinks they don't pray well. Everyone thinks they don't pray well, and basically everyone is in the same boat. Everyone thinks, oh, I'm sure the other person, all he has to do is close his eyes, and he's in mystical union with God. And no, that's not true. Everybody goes through dry periods. Everyone has difficulties in prayer. And so I talk about that as well. And I think one of the things that is the most frustrating for me, as someone who prays and tries to pray, is that people think it's for someone else, which is so sad.
Yep.
Because look, let's be blunt. Most people, and perhaps a lot of people listening, desire a relationship with God, and they hear, oh, the life of prayer is so important. And they might hear you say, I wouldn't be able to do this without prayer. They sit down and they close their eyes and they say two things. Now what? Or what's supposed to happen?
Yeah.
Or nothing's happened. That's three things. And they get discouraged and they stop. And who can blame them? The book is about continuing. The book is about, in a sense, pushing through that. And that's for everybody. So it tries to be a really practical book.
And when I say, I love that, because the kind of prayer that I engage in, certainly there are times when I sit down and focus. And pray for whatever an extended period of time looks like. We always give thanks for our meals, not because it's what I grew up doing, because I'm really grateful and I want my kids to be grateful. So before, I cross myself, we say a quick prayer.
It's great.
But the biggest part of my prayer life are these 100 prayers a day that are like one line long. My most common prayer, I am building something that it's in my Twitter bio. It says, I don't know what I'm doing. That's what it says. Before it says founder of Let's Give a Damn and consultant.
That should be in most people's Twitter bio.
I don't know what I'm doing. So my most common prayer every single day is, it's 3 words long. God help me. And then I'll just move on. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. It's like, God help me. And so, you talking about somebody hearing us and then sitting down, closing their eyes and expecting magic to happen. That's not it. And you're not going to hear God audibly speak to you. It's the beginning of this, and the reason that prayer works, I think, is because of the mystery, right? If you're looking for these definitive things to happen when you pray, forget it. You're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, I do think though that, however, I would amplify that a little bit. However, sometimes things do happen, and I
Yes.
think it's important to tell people that, because it's not simply us. So saying "Help me, God" is wonderful, and I do it all the time. Okay, so that's kind of talking to God, requesting petitionary prayers, which is important. But from time to time, we notice in our daily lives and in our prayer, there is a response. There is a real response, whether it's a feeling of peace or calm or insight or
Yes.
memories. Um, and yeah, so I think, in the book, I talk about those kind of quick prayers, which I do, we all do. And then sort of comparing it to a relationship, that would be like texting someone,
Yeah.
100 times a day, which is great. Maybe you text your wife 100 times a day, but at some point there does have to be that quiet, intimate, one-on-one, profound time. Now, the thing is, that doesn't mean that every time you have your one-on-one with your wife, like you go out for dinner or whatever, it's going to be bells and whistles, right? But it does mean that if you are faithful to that, at some point there will be bells and whistles. And that's the point. So it's fidelity is a really important part of prayer as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. That it's a both and for sure.
Yeah.
If it's all these text message
Right.
level, it's not even a conversation, like a monologue, and then maybe one back, right? One text back. There's got to be these. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you pointed out my wife and I, because 13 years married, we couldn't live. You can't just live on the text messages or
That's right.
or even the quick, like, in passing, I love you. That's intimate, but it's like it was so quick. It was so like boom, I'm gone. We have to have the 3-hour sit downs.
Yeah. And yet the texts are important too.
So important.
You would never say to your wife, "Don't text me. We have an hour." What you think about it, which is so funny. We have that hour a week. That's your time. I don't want to be texted. I'm working on my project. So for people, it's very much the both and also it depends on where you are in life. Your prayer will change. But the point of the book is it's for everyone. You can sort of anticipate results, not all the time, but here's what to expect, right, when you're praying. And the foundation is the relationship. And again, look, this goes back to the original question of how to stay in a church that is flawed. And for me, it's part of this is the relationship I have with God. And then I find God, largely right now and for the rest of my life through the Catholic Church. And I've made this promise to God that I'm in relationship with. So it's also not an abstract thing. It's not like I have these series of propositions that the church does or does not, satisfy, and I decide to leave whether or not it's. No, I'm in a relationship with God to whom I've made these promises. So I'm not going anywhere, much as some people would like me to. I do laugh sometimes. I shouldn't say this. I don't think I've ever admitted this, but people say, when are you leaving the church? I'm like, hey, buddy, I got news for you. Never.
There's something
I made a lot of promises.
Yeah, there's something profoundly important about that, and again, we could do a whole other hour on promises and commitments and just sticking with something. Because again, you go over the next thing, flawed, next thing, flawed, next thing, flawed. So why not stick with one that you believe in, one that you've made promises about, and say, no, if there's problems here, I want to be part of the solution. And those that move on after 5-10 years, they don't get to be part of the solution because they gave up too soon. But those that stick with it, for 50, 60, 70 years, they get to be part of the solution.
Yeah. And one of my favorite stories, I don't know how much time we have. It's a pretty short story, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
I often tell this to young Jesuits. I will never forget this. There was an older Jesuit I lived with named John Donahue, who has since, as they say, gone to God. And he was 90 when he died, but he was probably one of the holiest people I've ever met. Funny as hell, super smart, very funny wit. And one day I was at the community bulletin board in our Jesuit community, and he was glaring, I guess, at a note that was placed up by the Jesuits in our area, like the local Jesuit superior. And he said to me, he had this very gruff voice. He said, look at this. This is ridiculous. He's 90 years old. I'm like 40. I'm still kind of young in the Society of Jesus. And I said, what is it? Well, it was an announcement for a big province gathering, a gathering of all the Jesuits in New York. And it was, and as sometimes these things do, they had a theme. I'll never forget this. And he says, look at this question. And the theme was, what keeps me in the Jesuits? And I remember thinking, well, it sounds like it's kind of a nice topic of conversation. I looked at him and I said, that's not such a bad question. He turned to me, full face, and said, what keeps me in the Jesuits? I made a promise to God that I would stay in the Jesuits. That's what keeps me in the Jesuits. And I was like, gee. And I said to him, well, John, I think what it means is what enables you to stay? What's a support for you? Friends, prayer? He goes, that's a different question. I'll never forget that. And so I made a promise to God that I'd stay in. And so, I'm not, as I said, despite some of my critics, I'm not going anywhere.
I love that. I love that. Well, I do hope that we can, do this again. There's so much more to dig into. Friends listening to the podcast, especially this month during Pride Month, order Building a Bridge today. If you're interested just in how to include LGBTQ people, period, but especially in a faith context, specifically in the Catholic Church for this book, and also learning to pray. Like I said, a lot of people have talked about how they admire my, fervency and my able to keep going through stuff. Well, I'm just telling you, part of that is because of my faith and prayer. And so learning to pray, I'm not finished with it yet, but a wonderful book that I've benefited from so much so far. And Father Jim, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your story and wisdom and for helping us become better damn givers.
Truly a pleasure. And God bless you in your work.
That's it, my friends. Thank you so much for spending some time with Father Jim and me today. To learn more about Father James Martin, follow him on Twitter at JamesMartinSJ. And to keep up with all things Let's Give a Damn, visit letsgiveadamn.com and follow us on all the socials as well. A sincere thank you to each and every one of you for showing up today. I'm grateful for you. Chad Snavely, Jess Collins, and the team at Sound On Studios made this episode. The music is by our friend Propaganda. You can reach out anytime and for any reason at hello@letsgiveadamn.com. I love you all. Be safe. Keep giving a damn. Bye for now.